This is the breakout on overcoming sexual sin and understanding sexual sin. And I want to ask you a couple of questions real quick as we dive into this, all right? I'll tell you my own story first, and you can see the questions up there. But I grew up in Arkansas. I was the youngest of 3 kids. My next closest sibling is almost 11 years older than I am, and my oldest brother is 13 years older than I am. I grew up in an abusive home, spiritually abusive home, physically abusive. I stumbled upon some of the pornography that they had, and when I found pornography, then I was hooked. Pornography and masturbation, and then as each year when I got a little bit older, then the opportunities for what I could do expanded. So, every girl I ever dated, eventually cheated on, would become sexual with people very, very quickly. It didn't matter if they were a guy or a girl, just had this insatiable appetite. Went to college. I'm dating myself a little bit, but I went to college in 1991 and the internet was brand new, and I was a computer systems engineering major. So all of a sudden I had access to this new thing called the internet, and just troves and troves and troves of terabytes of pornography at my disposal. And then there's a day when I discovered internet chat rooms, and that was like I found crack cocaine. I mean, for whatever reason, that was my thing. And I could evaporate entire evenings doing internet chat rooms. And then graduated from college. I was in the military. I did 14 years active duty in the military. And my coping with stress was to get online at night and go act out via chat room somewhere. And then you reach a point where what you were once doing doesn't satisfy the way that it did before. And one thing led to another, as they say. And I was eventually unfaithful to my wife and had an affair. And then I vowed to just take that secret to my grave. Like it was a one-night stand kind of thing. It's going to the grave with me. It was stupid. And for 6 years I concealed that from my wife. But every single night of my life, it weighed on me. There's a scripture passage where David writes in Psalms, like, day and night your hand was heavy upon me. And I felt God calling me away from that guilt and shame, and yet I was terrified of being fully known for all the things that I had done. But then God used a crazy set of circumstances to break me. I was traveling one time with the military, working out in a hotel gym, and while I'm on the treadmill, I was a news addict too, so I'm watching Fox News, and they interrupt the show to say Michael Jackson had died. And I'm no Michael Jackson fan or anything, but knowing his story and some of the things he was accused of, predatory and pedophilia type stuff, there's a verse in Scripture that says it's appointed unto man once to die and then the judgment. And then it just kind of leapt onto my heart that whatever Michael Jackson did or didn't do, he was answering for in that moment, and he had no idea that day was going to be his day. And I went back to my hotel room and just wept and knew I've been gambling with my spiritual life, concealing a big secret that I had no right to conceal, and it was time to do some business with God. And I just prayed right then, God, if you want me to confess to my wife, you're going to have to miracle my vocal cords to get the words out, because I don't know how I'm going to do this. So I came back from that trip and I confessed to my wife, and that set in motion a long and painful process of dealing with my past trauma, dealing with my sexual addictive behaviors, coming to terms with the things that I had done in my own agency and creating the mess that I had in my life. And I experienced a lot of terrible help that wasn't helpful at all. And then God introduced me to some wonderful people that were able to disciple and counsel me out of that life. And out of that, God kind of birthed in me a calling that said, Joe, I've given you the keys to the prison, and I'm handing you, and your calling for the rest of your life is to run around unlocking as many fellow prisoners as you possibly can. And I made the decision to get out of the Army. I pursued my master's in professional counseling and focused on addiction and trauma. And I've been leading a ministry for 8.5 years now called Freedom Fighters. which is helping men and women face the demon of sexual sin and addiction. So I'm going to be kind of walking you through this morning. And I share my story solely, and there's many more layers to it, some of it you'll hear throughout the talk, but I share my story with you so that you can feel safe here and know that whatever your struggles or whatever it is you've done before, I have 0 stones to throw, and I'm an advocate for you because I know that God loves you and He has a better way for you. So let's dive into this whole thing called sexual sin and see. But some of the characteristics that sexual sin might be a problem for you. I'm not sure why this is not working. What I'm seeing on my screen is completely different. So I'm just going to walk you through this then and talk you through it. Here's some questions to ask yourself so that you can know if sexual sin is a problem for you. Number one, you're doing something that you're ashamed of or you have to keep secret. So normally, the things that we're proud of, we don't, hide in a separate corner of our life. And then those things that we hide in secret, have you tried before to stop or curtail them or limit them and been unsuccessful? And then thirdly, as you've done that, you found that I just can't seem to gain a lasting traction or a lasting victory over those things. And then when you don't have the ability to do these compulsory patterns, it creates a sense of anxiety or dread, or you feel like there's a clock ticking inside you that says, man, it's been 2 weeks since I last did this, and I don't know if I can go much longer. And then finally, it's like, are there lines in your life that you swore you would never cross, things that you swore you would never look at, or maybe you swore I'd never have an affair, and then you find yourself in the middle of that, or whatever, never purchase sex, etc., etc. And then you cross those lines, and then after you cross those lines, you cross another and another. One of the things I do is I work with an organization that hosts what's called the AIM School. It stands for Awareness and Information for Men, and it's like a one-day crash course for men who have been arrested for prostitution. And every time I sit in that class with a group full of men, and no one planned to be in that classroom, but it happens. And it's important that we address this stuff. So these are just kind of thought-provoking questions for you as you go on. There we go. So God's got a better way. But let's talk about where this is about understanding sexual sin. So let's talk about how sexual sin became a problem in the first place. As you know, in the creation story, God created Adam, and then from Adam He created Eve, and then it says that the two of them were both naked and unashamed. And then there comes this point where they eat from the tree that God said don't eat from, and then it says that their eyes were open, and that they realized that they were naked, and then they ran and hid. And then God sought them out to come and find them, and when He finds them, He pronounces the effects or the consequences of the fall. And if you remember and understand that story, for the man, the consequences of that was, I put you here to till the earth and subdue it and rule over it, but now it's not going to be so easy. Thorns and thistles are going to spring from the ground. The earth itself is going to oppose you, and until the day that you die, you're going to eat by the sweat of your brow. And in fact, what that means is when God made Adam and put Adam in the garden, before He made Eve, He said, what's your job? Your job is to name the animals, rule the garden, tend for it, and keep it. And then now, Adam's identity has fallen under attack because the very thing that he was made to do now is going to be incredibly and profoundly disappointing and incredibly difficult. Despite his best efforts on a daily basis, he's just barely going to squeak by until his dying breath. And then to add on top of it, God says, and from dust you came, and to dust you'll return. You're going to go right back into it. And there's a sense of futility and inadequacy that deals with inside every man. I'm a pretty high performer kind of guy, and I was an officer in the military and all that other stuff, but I can tell you that I lived with this shadow of what I call the imposter syndrome that was like, I'm just one briefing away, or I'm just one decision away, or I'm just one sermon away, or whatever, from being exposed as a total nobody. And it comes from the effects of the fall. For Eve, what happened over here with Eve was God said to her, you're going to experience great pain in childbearing. That's no longer going to be a joyful experience for you. It's going to be incredibly painful. And then he says, strangely, he says, and your desire will be for your husband. I'm like, what's wrong with that, right? Why is it bad, a curse that my wife might desire me? But what God's really saying here is you're going to experience pain that only a woman experiences. But your heart's cry is going to be for a man to get it and understand, and he never will. He just won't be able to relate with you in the way that you crave. And so the effect of men and women's relationships sexually since then has been it leaves women with this sense of, I'm too much. If I really share the fullness of who I am, you can't handle me. I'm too much for you. And the way a woman deals with that then is she contains herself and she packages herself and she presents herself as this persona, this beautiful woman who is willing to use her body and her beauty and sex to hook a man into her world so that he will medicate her sense of feeling like I'm too much. And then you have a man over here who's feeling like I'm incredibly inadequate, there's something inherently defective about me. And man, when a woman offers her body and herself to me, then that medicates my sense of feeling like I'm not enough. So the woman struggles with I'm too much, and the man struggles with I'm not enough, and through our own dysfunctions we come together, and then sexuality gets exploited and destroyed from the way that God originally intended from. And so that's why it's so easy for us men to seek out pornography or to fantasize or to enter into illicit relationships, because we're trying to medicate something within our soul that we're not going to be able to scratch all on our own. And it leads us down a very painful path. And so here's what happens is then, we have past trauma in our life or abuse in our life, and then just the effects of the fall in general, we develop a set of core beliefs. And a core belief is something that you believe without even having to think that I believe it. And it's just how you operate. It's like your operating system inside your mind. It's like these are the fundamental principles by which I make decisions on a daily basis. And these core beliefs are, number one, that I'm this bad, unworthy, defective person. That's one of the products of the fall, but it's amplified when there's abuse and trauma in your back. When someone beats you, or when someone sexually assaults you, they're telling you that there's something wrong with you. And they medicate their abuse by making the victim think it's their fault. And so through the consequences of sin and the consequences of abuse and trauma, this core belief of I'm a bad, unworthy, unlovable person takes root. And then secondly, then, when you believe that you're somehow fundamentally defective, that goes into each one of these build upon one another, and so then you feel like you have to keep secrets. That's what Adam and Eve did after the fall, right? They ran from God, they hid in the bushes, and they began to cover themselves. They're trying to keep a secret because they realized that there was something fundamentally wrong in that moment. And so the second belief up here then is you live as if no one would love me if they really knew me. And guys, we're notorious about being in super shallow, superficial relationships that have no meaning whatsoever because we're operating on this belief that no one would love me if they really knew. If I opened up to you and I told you about all the women I've used and discarded in my past, if I opened up and shared with you the fantasies that I've had in my head with my girlfriend or wife right in the room with me, or where my eyes have gone, or et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, I'm afraid at some level you'll reject me. You'll be repulsed by me. No one would love me if they really knew me. And when we believe that, then we conceal ourselves and isolate ourselves from the world. And then that leads to the third belief up here, then, is since no one else knows me, and they wouldn't love me if they did, then I got to take care of me. I have to meet my own needs. So then no one gets the privilege of entering into your story to really know what's going on, and then you have to provide for yourself. And then we find a way to medicate that pain from the first core beliefs. And every addiction, no matter what it is, alcohol, drugs, eating disorders, whatever, fundamentally, it's about escaping reality and medicating pain. And when we get to this third core belief of I have to meet my own needs, we find that one of the ways I meet my needs is rather than pursue God's design for sex, rather than risk true intimacy with other people, I will meet my own need by taking a microwave shortcut, which is pornography or masturbation or fantasizing in my head or entering into a sexual relationship with someone that's not my spouse. And that's our way of meeting our needs. And when we do that consistently over time, like when I was a kid, no one ever offered me drugs or alcohol. That was never a problem. But when I found pornography and it scratched the itch, when I saw my dad in the garage reading some erotic literature, there was an opportunity for me to choose an escape. And then I habitualized that escape over time and did it over and over and over and over again. And that leads to the fourth one up here, is my greatest need then becomes my addiction. My greatest need is sex, your form of acting out, whatever that might be for you. And then finally, number 5, then shame comes from doing this. And when we do that, then we tell ourselves that no one else is like this. I mean, it doesn't surprise me that in a room on this topic right here, everyone is seated with lots of space in between them. Because we feel inherently isolated from other people because of the shame of the things that we've done and struggled with. And God is calling us away from that because this is a tool of the enemy. But when I say we'll believe that no one else is like this, I mean, fundamentally you can say I struggle with porn, I get other guys struggle with porn, I masturbate, plenty of other people do. But where you start to become an exception in your thinking is that no one else is like this, is when you begin to think, but no one looks at the stuff that I look at. No one has the sick fantasies that I do. No one looks at it as long as I do. Or no one else has masturbated to the point of blistering themselves. No one else has da-da-da-da-da. And we find ways to feel exceptional, which takes us all the way back up to the top, and it reinforces that first core belief to see, because I'm exceptionally bad, therefore I'm exceptionally unlovable and defective, and then it just becomes more and more entrenched over time. And we need an injection of truth to break through that. So I said a while ago that every addiction is about escaping reality and medicating pain. And in Proverbs there's a verse that talks about a person that's struggling to let him drink and forget his poverty and remember his misery no more. In other words, he's saying let him punch out from reality and not have to face it. And when that happens, we don't solve anything, and then we accumulate more problems. So we'll look at how this kind of plays out in our life. Okay, so as you are living your life and things are going on, you may not always feel this temptation to escape and medicate. But for each one of you, inside your story, there are certain hot buttons, or there's certain conditions that present themselves that activate this sense of I want to escape and medicate. And we call that a trigger. And when a trigger occurs, there's all of a sudden, your desire to want to punch out and get out of Dodge is now right there in front of you. And by punch out, I mean to escape and go look at porn, or escape and masturbate, or do something like that. And then you become preoccupied with, man, when I get home, I'm going to fire up the laptop, and I'm going to go to this site, and I'm going to do this thing, this thing, this thing. And the reason, that's how the escape mechanism of an addiction works, is if, for example, when I feel overextended and I feel like the weight of the world is on my shoulders and nobody gives a crap, that's when I start feeling overwhelmed and I want relief from that. And then so I can easily be preoccupied with a fantasy in my mind where I'm not in charge of anything and someone else is calling all the shots and I'm just along for the ride. That feels great. So there's no way to displace a very powerful and strong emotion without replacing it with something that's of greater magnitude. And nothing like sex and sexuality that's more powerful than what might be troubling you in your given day. So that's preoccupation. And what preoccupation serves the effect of doing is then where you're living your life and you're looking at the world, in full vision, what preoccupation does is your mind begins to narrow and you begin looking at the world through the straw of whatever you're preoccupied with. And that's where we get stupid. You know, when God designed sex between a husband and wife, he literally created our brain so that we cannot orgasm if we are consumed with the laundry or the kids or how am I ever going to pay for retirement and all that other stuff. We have to be fully focused and zero in. And it was meant by God to be a bonding experience between the husband and the wife. And there's a whole chemical cascade that facilitates that process. When it's taken outside of that context, then what happens is you're preoccupied with something that is not for the purpose God intended it. And then you are, the portions of your brain that deal with judgment, that deal with focusing on the future, that deal with your ability to logically think of like if I do A, B, and C will likely happen, etc. Those pieces of the brain actually shut down. And so that's when you're in this state of mind of being preoccupied that you begin to do stuff that you wouldn't do when you're in your normal state of mind. And then that preoccupation left unchecked will facilitate this further unleashing of that chemical cascade inside your body, and it becomes like a snowball at the top of a mountain that the further it rolls downhill, the more momentum and size that it picks up to the point where it has a force all of its own. And so that's preoccupation. And you know, some scriptures here that talk about this is, he says in Job, "Take heed, do not turn to iniquity, for you have chosen this rather than your affliction." In other words, you're choosing to escape rather than facing the problem that you have at hand. And then in Psalm it says, "He who devises wickedness on his bed, he sets himself in a way that is not good. He is not abhor evil." The logic part of his brain is turned off. And so when preoccupation is unchecked, well, then it leads into what we call the ritual. And rituals are things that you do in a compulsory cycle that allows the escape and medication to continue for as long as you want it to continue. So, for example, we all know in here that if we were talking about alcohol, that there's a finite amount of alcohol that a person can consume before they either kill themselves or pass out. And so an alcoholic then would develop rituals around drinking and social scenarios and such so that the alcohol consumption is metered out over a period of time, and they do it in such a way that they can ride the wave so that they can stay as inebriated as possible yet retain consciousness, and the experience lasts as long as it can. And then it's as unique as each individual. When we're talking about in a sexual context, what rituals do is you know you're doing something you're probably going to regret later, but it's not at the forefront of your mind because that part of your brain's not really working at that moment. But it's kind of a way of stepping into the pool on the shallow end of the pool, and then you're starting wading in. So my ritual was I would travel a lot with the military, as I mentioned. I would call my wife and I would say, "Oh, honey, it's getting late. I'm going to go to bed because I got a big hard day tomorrow. Now I know I'm not going to be interrupted." And then I'd fire up my laptop and I would go to Yahoo Sports. I'd see how the Razorbacks are doing. I would check my stocks. I would check the weather for the next day. And I would do this, handful of things that I would track down every night. Then I would go to a chat room and I'd be inside that chat room, have maybe do some trivia competitions or something like that, knowing full well where I'm going to end up, right? But I know intuitively, even though I'm not thinking it consciously, that you can only masturbate for so long before you either run out of the opportunity or you physically injure yourself. And so the ritual just expands this escape and medication for as maximum amount of time possible. Now some of you, you may not have a lot of time available, so when you act out, your rituals are very compressed, and you've designed rituals to let's get in, get done, hide my tracks, and get out. But nonetheless, they're still rituals. And you can identify those by kind of asking yourself, if a DVD documentary film crew were following me around making a film of this, and they watched every time I acted out, what common denominators would they see every time? And then you would begin to get a picture of what your personal rituals are. So, all right, next slide. This is what rituals do, is they have an entrenching effect that cements a pattern and becomes an ingrained part of you. Proverbs says, "Whoever rewards evil for good, evil will not depart from his house." So each time you repeat this cycle, each time you repeat these rituals, it becomes further ingrained. You're habitualized to it. It's a rewarding activity. I mean, the reward of orgasm and the oxytocin and serotonin and the dopamine that get released when you're doing that are a powerful cocktail that make that a rewarding behavior for you. Even though it's a costly behavior, it makes it rewarding. And then each time you do that, there's this thing called neural etching, where your brain literally has etched into it by chemicals, this is the path to pleasure for Joe Pullen. And it's the highway and it's the shortcut. And the more you do that, then the more powerful it becomes and easier to access that pathway. All right, and then that leads to acting out. And by acting out, it's whatever acting out is for you. It's the masturbation, it's the hookup, it's the exchange of money for sex, whatever. But it's the acting out. And then what happens in that moment that culminates at orgasm then is you get the reward for all this other behavior. The chemical reward, you get the pleasure reward, and you're confronted with why you did it in the first place. And then what happens is there's a signal that goes to your brain at orgasm because you're looking at the world through a straw and so much of your brain is turned off. There's a signal that goes to your brain that says, hey, we can't live like that all the time. That's dangerous. We got to go back to normal. And then that takes you from here and it resets you back to your normal way of looking at the world and thinking. And that's when your judgment returns and your ability to see A plus B plus C equals D. And then all of a sudden you're like, holy crap, what did I just do? I can't believe I've done it again. And you feel great amounts of shame and regret. You begin telling yourself, all the stories that emanate from that list of core beliefs we discussed. For me, I would repent for the millionth time, and that's the last time. And I'm trying to convince myself that the problem that I had that's this big is really like this big. And all you gotta do, Joe, is delete your Yahoo user account, and you can't do that stuff anymore. Knowing full well, part of my ritual was making a new user account. And so when the lights turn back on inside your mind, then you're confronted with the reality of what you just did, and we call that despair. And you experience this despondency over what you've just done, and then all the shame talk comes in. You may be facing consequences for it, or you're forced to hide your tracks, and that just builds more shame. And then because this whole cycle is about escaping reality and medicating pain, and you've done nothing to get to the root of why am I escaping and why am I medicating, then really the despair just kind of sets you back up off and resets the clock to go around the cycle again the next time a powerful emotional trigger comes along. And because it is chemically addictive inside your brain, a sex addict is a drug addict. We're addicted to dopamine and serotonin and oxytocin. The only difference is I don't have to drink anything, I don't have to shoot anything up in my bloodstream. And because this is addictive, then you begin to feel the withdrawal effects, and then the tension of life continues to rise, and then over time you need to do either more frequently or something more intensely in order to get the same effects as before. And that's where you get into that phase where you're crossing lines you never imagined that you had crossed, or the amounts of time that you spend have expanded, or you start fusing pornography with violence, or you start, you morph, in other words, in order to get an amped up chemical effect in your mind. And that's known as the addictive cycle. So the question becomes then is, do you want to get out of that? Like, have you reached a point of intolerance with going round and round this merry-go-round where you're ready to escape? And that's primarily the focus of the next talk that I'm going to do, but I want to open it up for questions. I just want to share a little bit here. The way out of this is through Christ and through a process of discipleship. It's where God's Word and God's people and His Spirit all intersect, and they dive into your story and begin to show you that your desires to deal with your trauma and your past and your desire to be a sexual person are God-given things, but a discipleship journey that says, but your method of dealing with escaping reality and medicating pain is actually destroying you. Let us show you a better way. And so this ministry, Freedom Fighters, that I lead is designed around attacking this cycle at every single juncture along the way, and even getting into the root of why am I escaping and medicating reality in the first place? What is it that I'm running from? Because most of us have gotten so used to running and going there as soon as the temperature rises just a little bit that we've forgotten even really the original reasons that brought us there. And then even our fantasies. You know, when you fantasize about something, there's a reason you fantasize about something. You're fantasizing because you're dissatisfied with your reality. Like, I don't fantasize at night how to use a cell phone. I've got that covered. But I've got some really financial challenges in my life, so I do fantasize about checking the stock market and seeing some of my investments jack up, you know, like $200 a share or something, because that's what my reality could use, and I don't have that in my reality. So part of being discipled out of sexual sin is dissecting your fantasies. Like, what are you really trying to address through your fantasies and medicate? What alternate world have you constructed? So I'm really vulnerable here. I told you what happened with me and my brothers when I was young, and my mom being present but not really engaged in thwarting it. A big part of my sexual fantasy script was imagining a scenario in which a woman would be telling me to be sexual with another man, and she was like really, really into it. And I don't have any homosexual or same-sex attraction. It's just not part of my story, really. The pivotal thing for me was that the woman in this fantasy was really engaged and really a part of it. And when you peel that apart, it's a retelling of my trauma story, except this time the story ends differently. Instead of my mom not being present and engaged to protect me, she's right front and center. And instead of being the little kid at the bottom of the pile, I'm the one standing back calling the shots of what will and won't happen. And I constructed a fantasy to turn my trauma inside out and get a different outcome. And it was like when God began to connect those dots for me and help me understand that, it was like the curtain on the Wizard of Oz was pulled back and the whole fraud was up. But you need somebody to help you walk through that. So what I'm going to pass around here is just because due to lack of time, and in case you want to go to a different session besides the next one, is an explanation of Freedom Fighters and how we do our discipleship stuff. It is a discipleship journey where we focus intently on leading men out of sexual sin, but we do it in a very relational way at an individual and group and teaching level, and it is phenomenal. And one of the things that many of you will try and have tried, I want to deal with this on my own. Give me some tips, I'll buy a book, and I'll read the book, but that's not the way God designed us to heal from sexual woundedness. When we go back to the roots of sexual sin, and we look at where it came from, the fall, it is a relational issue. And so to heal a relational issue in isolation is just not possible. You need to be in community, because when you're in community with other men, and you're facing these struggles, then you're repairing the damage of the fall, and you're repairing the damage of your own past trauma stories and all that other stuff. When you can sit in front of a group of men and talk about your stuff, and then in real time, you're getting guys giving you, the head nod and seeing tears in their eyes and all that other stuff as they're identifying, empathizing, and not judging your story, then it begins to dismantle those core beliefs of, you know what, I can be known and fully loved. I can be fully known and I can be fully loved. People do understand. I'm not exceptional. I'm in a room full of guys with very similar stories. And there's something that God uses in the miracle of group counseling to do some divine transactions that heal men's souls. And I want to invite you into that if this is your struggle. All right, so I'm going to I'm just going to send some down the front, if you'll pass them back, and I'll send some over here. And then while it's going around, if there's any questions or comments, just let me know. And please make sure I get these back to the next group too.